Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity
and by Pelvic Health Professionals. All of your yoga students have a pelvis and a pelvic floor, and yet most yoga teacher trainings don't cover pelvic health anatomy or topics. If you would like to be connected with worldwide pelvic health experts and learn the most up-to-date information, make sure to check out pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And as a very special gift to you, because you are here as a podcast listener, use the coupon code CONNECTED2021 to get a month of free access. This is valid until the end of 2021. So head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com, use the code CONNECTED2021, and we'll see you in there. And you can check it out for the entire month and then decide if you want to stay. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a Canadian who is learning more about what it means when you live on Indigenous land, because all of my ancestors came here as immigrants from Ireland, England, Scotland, and Germany. This podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabeg, Odawa, and Mississauga land, and I am working at learning more about the people who were here first. While on my morning walks, I have been listening to the audiobook Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. If you have not read this book, I highly recommend you do. I'm so grateful to those of you who told me to listen to the audio version of this. It's amazing to be walking out in nature while listening to it. Also, a random fact about me, because I've been sharing those on the podcast for a while now, and most of you are telling me, hey, I really like that, or you have some comment about it. So here we are with another one today. The random fact for today is that I do not like coffee, and I have really tried. I love the smell of coffee. It just smells like the morning. I have friends who love coffee. I've tried different specialty coffees, and I have to tell you that every time I drink coffee, I just think this is disgusting. Why does anyone drink this? I know I am not the majority of people out there. I know a lot of you love your coffee, but that's the way I feel about my tea. So I like a good red rose, orange pekoe tea to start my day. I'm also a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, podcaster, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And this podcast was created for you because I know what it feels like. I remember feeling like I'd just been dropped off in the jungles of entrepreneurship and teaching yoga as a new yoga teacher. And so this podcast was created so that each and every week you can feel connected to the information and inspiration that will support you as you build your very unique yoga business. Today, we're going to hang out together. It's a solo episode. Sometimes I overthink these. I tell you, today's I have been giving a lot of thought to because it's a more vulnerable topic. I'm going to dig right in and talk about how I've been wrong and how this is happening all the time with yoga teachers. And personally, I don't feel like it's being talked about enough, not just in the yoga community, but in the world in general. I also want to talk about what we do when we mess up, we make a mistake, or we realize that something we said or did is quote unquote wrong. I really, truly believe that this has to be part of teaching yoga. We can't take a 200-hour or even a 500-hour or 1,000 hours of training and then know everything for every individual who walks into our yoga class. That's just not possible. It's really the same with everything else we do. For example, gardening. A friend of mine recently was saying how she killed all of her tomato plants this year and how she can't be a quote-unquote real gardener if she can't grow tomatoes. If you are a gardener, then you know that so many factors go into what actually grows. And so many of these factors are out of our control. So think about if we have a wild hail or windstorm or a lot of rain like this year or no rain in other years. We might have poor seeds or a pest invasion. I'm laughing because some of my seeds I saved so precious. And just a few watermelon seeds that grew out of this tiny little watermelon. And then some little rodent came into our garage and ate them. So it was like, I had the seeds, but then someone decided they were a really good snack. Okay, I'm getting off track. So let's get back on track. We can't know everything about gardening or teaching yoga. And really the best way to learn is to jump in and do the thing and learn as we go. And as yoga teachers, we really want to minimize harm. And we've had multiple podcasts on how we can do that. And we want to know as much as possible before we begin to teach. I get that. We're also living in a totally different time as yoga teachers. We're living all together in a pandemic, working with humans who spend a lot of time on screens, not just right now, but also when we moved and shifted to this working a 9-to-5 job, having more people on computers. There are many things that are impacting our society. We might have students who come to class with an injury or a condition, and they might not tell us about that condition that they have. There are so many factors out of our control as yoga teachers, and I am not telling you this to freak you out. I just want to say that it's the same thing when we look at, how everything is happening when we go to grow a garden, and all of these elements are happening as well when students walk into our yoga classes. I often say that my 3 kids are my best teachers, and this is 100% true. For example, I've learned that as a parent, I am going to mess up. I'm going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, and the quicker that I can own up to it, apologize, learn, and do better, the better off we all are. And I don't know if it's the way I was raised or if it's just something that comes along with, we think, okay, because I'm the parent, I need to know best. Telling others that you don't know the answer to something or admitting that you were wrong is not a weakness. It is not showing that you don't know things. It takes a lot of strength and courage. And I believe that we need to normalize being wrong, learning new things, learning new ways of being, unlearning old ways, making quote unquote mistakes so that we can continue to learn and do better. Imagine if medical professionals stayed stuck in the time where we didn't wash our hands. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that doctors realized that going straight from an autopsy to the maternity ward where people were giving birth was not a good idea. There's a whole article on this that's quite fascinating over at history.com. I'll make sure that we link to it in the show notes. It's basically like the history of hand washing. And it's also really important to note, and this is something that I learned in this article, is that there was controversy and misinformation that went along with the new information. So at the time, humans didn't know about microorganisms or germ theory. And for a while, some doctors thought the issue was caused by cadaveric materials. So they thought that when doctors went from that autopsy right to a birth, it was the cadaveric materials. We know now that that's not the case. We know about microbiology now. So at the time, they had some parts right. They were like, hey, this person over here who washes their hands, that's working. So let's introduce that. I mean, there was one doctor who decided, okay, everyone needs to wash their hands in chlorinated lime after their autopsies, which I'm sure isn't a great thing to be washing your hands in all day, every day. I outline this because it was messy. It's not like we weren't washing our hands. And then one day there was a switch that was just flipped and we all realized the importance of washing our hands. Now we know more and we do better. But imagine if you were a doctor who just learned the harm that you might have caused by not washing your hands. And in this case, it was death, right? What would you do or say in that moment? I also want to throw in here that I think it's super important to look at the medical community in this example and pull this into the yoga community. So I think something else that's great in the medical community is that doctors view each other as professionals. They're not trying to take down one particular doctor, usually, for their views. They're trying to move together forward as a profession. And that's what I really hope for the yoga teacher world, the yoga profession, is that we learn more together. And it will be messy sometimes, and it takes time. And then we do better for our yoga students and for the practice of yoga. Now, I have some examples, and this first one is from the yoga world. I think it's a really great example. It happened recently, and I'm so grateful to Jennifer Street Davis, who gave me permission to use this here on the podcast. Jennifer is a member of Pelvic Health Professionals and posted a message in our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group saying, I listened to the pelvic floor engagement with Carolyn Van Dyken and Shannon Crow today. So just to clarify, that was over in Pelvic Health Professionals. And Jennifer went on to say, it was so enlightening and eye-opening to what I've been cueing in my classes. I was taught to engage the core because it will strengthen the lower spine. I feel like I've been doing a disservice to my students. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for really announcing this publicly, because I know what this feels like. I'll get into an example soon where I came to this moment, this realization, hey, something I've been cueing doesn't make sense anymore because of what I'm learning. And so I replied to Jennifer in that thread and I said, Jennifer, I hear you on this. It was actually the main reason to start Pelvic Health Professionals, because what I was learning from pelvic health PTs wasn't being covered, or it was going against what I had previously learned as a yoga teacher. So you are not alone. And as Alexis said, now you will do better. So thank you. And shout out to Alexis as well, who shared a comment that was like, we're all in this. Now you're going to do better now that you know something different. This is what all professionals do who work with individuals. We can't know everything on day one, I went on to say to Jennifer. Also, some exciting news. I shared this in the thread and I'm excited to share it with all of you. Because we had some tech issues with our previous call with Carolyn Van Dyken, we're going to do another one with her in November. It's actually, as this podcast goes out today. Today is when we're doing the live call, but there will be a replay if you want to access that. And I go on to say to Jennifer, so bring all of your questions. Thanks for sharing this here. And then I go on to say you can check that out at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And before we go in further, and I talk about this a little bit more, I want to also remind you, if you didn't hear at the top of today's episode, that you can actually get a whole free month of Pelvic Health Professionals. So if you're thinking, oh, wait, I've been cueing pelvic floor engagement, or I've been cueing engagement of the core, or I want to learn more about this, come on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com and use our coupon code CONNECTED2021. So in summary of this, we are continuously learning as yoga teachers. If we stay stuck in previous knowledge, if we stop learning, we will not be serving our students. Let me share a personal example of this. So I took a training with Trista Zinn. It was a 2-day training on the hypopressive method. It was level 1. And we actually did a podcast episode a while back with Trista. And I'll link to that in the show notes in case you want to hear all about the hypopressive method. And we really dig into what I had been learning in yoga teacher training and then what I started to have questions about once I learned the hypopressive method. So after that training, I realized that I was teaching breath in a way that did not fit what I had just learned from Trista. I had been taught things in YTT, and I had learned cues about breath that all of a sudden did not make sense. And I started to question things, and I actually created a blog post, and I emailed the teachers and students that I'd worked with, and I sent out what felt to me like an apology letter. And I want to tell you that it was very scary to do that at the time. And it was also liberating, and it worked out so well. So I didn't have all the answers about how the breath works in the human body. But in that article, I made a list of the things I did know. And I asked people to try it, to personally try ribcage breath versus belly breathing and see what they noticed. And honestly, out of everything, the thread of comments in that meant so much to me because it showed me that everyone has a unique experience, no matter what. So remember that coming back to the garden and the elements that are out of our control, there are so many pieces of a person that we cannot see, we cannot know. There are so many environmental factors. There's so much going on with complex human beings. So we just cannot have all the answers of how someone will experience something. And what I learned in that is how to talk to people about what I had been teaching, why I was changing some of my cues. And I had this list of what I know about breath now. And I'm wondering, as I say this to you, would you like a podcast on that? I'm happy to do a podcast on what I used to teach with regards to breath, and now what I teach and what I know about breath. It'd be interesting to go back to that list because maybe I have more questions now. Maybe it's time for me to look at it all over again with fresh eyes. So do let me know if you want to hear a podcast all about breath. I'd be happy to do one. Another example of when I was learning to do better, or this other example is I just didn't have the information. So when I started to teach prenatal yoga teacher training, along with my friend Kim McDonald, we co-created a prenatal yoga teacher training. We both agreed that it would be best to hire a pelvic health PT. So a big shout out to Dr. Sinead Dufour, who has actually been on the podcast talking about this. We met Sinead in that training. We were just blown away by the information that she shared. And I asked her to come on the podcast and talk about diastasis recti. So Sinead came in to talk with our soon-to-be registered prenatal yoga teachers about pelvic health considerations for our pre- and postnatal yoga students, and also what considerations for birth and the recovery after birth. And in that class, we were learning all about diastasis recti. And it was right then that I volunteered to be like, hey, I'll be the demo person in the room and I'll lie down and let you look at my linea alba. And I learned right in that moment that I had diastasis recti. And this is 9 years postpartum after having my last baby. And I had no idea. And in that moment, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't know this. And here I've been teaching prenatal, and I've been teaching prenatal yoga teacher training. And so I just want to reassure you that as you begin to learn, it might feel uncomfortable. I was learning for my own body, for future yoga teacher trainings, and also for the pre and postnatal students that I was teaching in my community. And at the time, the information about diastasis recti was all over the map online. And there's still so much misinformation online about diastasis recti. I found lists of poses of like, do this, make sure you never do this. And all of the information seemed really contradictory. So one website would say, make sure you don't do this, and another website would say, make sure you do this. One example is, I remember table pose being one of those that would show up on the do this helps with diastasis, or do not ever do this pose, make sure you don't come into table pose. And that's a pose we use all the time in prenatal yoga. So I remember just feeling so confused about this at the time. And this struggle, this challenge right there, that messy, uncomfortable spot, it's one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to create Pelvic Health Professionals. Because what I started to do is I started to personally look for experts to talk to about pelvic health. So I remember having phone calls with people like Shelley Prosco or Dr. Sinead Dufour and just really picking their brain. I would pay for their time. I think that's very important to do. And I would have a huge list of questions and just start to fire those questions at them, record the call, and pack in all I could in that hour. And then I started to have this idea, why couldn't this be shared with other yoga teachers? And beyond that, it even went even further. What about if this was shared with other pelvic health professionals so that we started to sort of break down those barriers? So if you're a yoga teacher and you learn about the breath and you learn about the core, it's very different from what a physiotherapist or physical therapist learns about the core and the pelvic floor and pelvic health versus what a gynecologist learns or a PT who specializes in pelvic health. And so I wanted the information to cross over enough. And what's exciting is to see all of the questions that come out from our pelvic health professionals. So yes, I have questions. I love to ask questions, as all of you know who listen to me ask many questions on the podcast, to my guests, to myself, to you. I have a lot of questions. But the real magic happens when you combine a lot of questions and create a resource. And that's what I'm excited that we've been able to do inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. And I really think that's our foundation to learning, is asking more questions. And if you are feeling like, okay, well, I want to learn right now more about diastasis, we have a podcast that we can link to in the show notes with Dr. Sinead Dufour. And then we also asked her to come in and speak more about intra-abdominal pressure. And we wanted to ask more questions about that. So that's inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. And like I said, you have a coupon code. You can jump in there and learn all you can. You'll have a month of access with that. So the thing that I hope we get really comfortable with as yoga teachers is not only making mistakes and being wrong, but also ending up with way more questions than answers. Something I'm starting to question right now is the core. So this is thank you to some great conversations with different pelvic health professionals and experts, because I keep hearing cues like engage the pelvic floor, engage the core, strengthen your core and you'll protect your back, as Jennifer had said. That cue comes up a lot in yoga spaces. Or stabilize through the core. What's fascinating, and I remember hearing this from Carolyn Van Dyken first, is that there is no science to back that up. I'm not saying science is everything, but when we have zero science to back something up, and we have done a lot of testing around how the body works, we have to really start to ask questions about why are we saying that? What's our intention? What do we really want someone to do when we shout out a cue in a class? Engage your core. What are we really hoping someone will be doing? And so I'm at that place again. I've invested in this. I've done podcasts on the core. I've taught trainings. I've talked to all of you about the core 4. And now I'm wondering, is that a thing? Like, who said that the diaphragm, pelvic floor, multifidi, and transversus abdominis muscles, that this is the core? Who said that? And who gets to say that? And are we forgetting other muscles in that we can celebrate all of the things that these 4 muscle groups do, but we can also have a lot more questions. And if you have thoughts on this, I would love to hear them. I'd also love to hear your questions. Maybe you don't have answers, but you have more questions. One thing that I really appreciate about Pelvic Health Professionals is that we have a questions form. And so day or night, 24 hours a day, people can submit a question and it stays organized in this really nice table. In that table, we ask you, do you want to share your name, or would you like this to be an anonymous question? And what's great is we can sit with those questions and say, okay, who are the guest experts that can answer this question? Or is this a question for the whole group? Or who can we hire to come in and talk about this so that this member can get help with that? And what I love is that question just stays on the document until we find some type of answer. And sometimes we ask these questions to multiple guests because we need multiple views on something. It's really cool. I love how we have it set up. So while I'm sharing how great it is to be wrong or to have more questions than answers, I also want to talk about what it feels like when someone approaches you with feedback, because I recently got some feedback about a previous podcast that we did, and I want to talk about how I messed up and how I said some wrong things. But before we dive into that, let's say a huge thank you to our sponsor, Schedulicity, and hear the hot tip of the week from the team over there.
Hey connected yoga teachers, this is Anna with the Schedulicity hot tip of the week. Schedulicity is pleased to present improvements to our class booking feature. We worked with yoga businesses to find out what they really needed to make their business more successful and less stressful. Together, we developed group booking, online waivers, waitlists, and client alerts to help you manage the needs of your students and grow as a business. If you've been wondering how an online scheduler can help you specifically as a business, we'd love to tell you more. Email us anytime at support@schedulicity.com or visit schedulicity.com for more information and a chat with one of our support rockstars.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity, for bringing this podcast to all of our listeners today, and also for offering our listeners 2 months of free access. So if you would like the coupon code, you can head over to theconnectedyogateacher.com/247, and near the bottom where the links are, you'll see that we've put the coupon code there for you. It's CYT 2 months. All capital letters, and I know it's sometimes hard to remember, so you don't have to remember all of that. Just make sure you remember to go to episode 247, Being Wrong is Part of Learning. That's what we're talking about today. So let's get back to how being wrong is part of learning, and I was just about to share this very personal example where a podcast listener, huge gratitude to Aaron, who said yes to me sharing this on the podcast. A podcast listener reached out to me and sent me an email with feedback about something that I had said in episode 108. In this episode, just a quick summary, I was talking about inclusive language for prenatal yoga. And so my entire goal with this episode was to make sure that people felt like a yoga space was more inclusive for them, regardless of gender. And the feedback that I got back from Aaron, I'll share it in a moment. There's something that I said that requires me to do some more work. So Aaron wrote to me and they said, "Hi, Shannon. I just listened to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast 108 on inclusive language for prenatal yoga classes. I want to thank you for delving into such an important topic and for the many helpful suggestions you offered to listeners. It's wonderful to see these conversations happening. I would like to offer a bit of constructive feedback. I noticed that several times when you referred to a trans person, you referred to them as being born one sex and now they are a different gender. For example, born female, now a man. This language choice can actually be experienced as invalidating and triggering by many trans people, as it non-consensually labels them in the past tense as a sex they do not identify with. This can be a painful reminder of when they were squashed into a box that didn't fit and nobody recognized or affirmed who they really were. People do not become trans at a moment of coming out or beginning to transition. Most have had a long-standing internal experience that simply wasn't validated by the external world yet. A way of rephrasing the language with greater respect and affirmation would be to say, for example, labeled female at birth, identifies as male. I recognize your very positive intentions in doing this podcast, and for the most part, I think you did a very good job. I also honor the difficult work you have embarked on within yourself to learn new ideas and terminology, to investigate your internal resistance and so forth. I know it's not always easy, and I'm grateful both that you are doing the work yourself and that you are utilizing your platform to reach many people. Thank you so much. Namaste. Erin Ewing, they, them, who is a yoga therapist and teacher at Butterfly Tree Yoga on unceded Lekwungen territories, also known as Victoria, BC. Now, I replied to Erin with an email, and at the moment, I just remember feeling so much gratitude because Erin gave me so much information. I learned so much from that email. I also asked them if I could share this on the podcast so that we can learn together. So, yes, about the language and how it matters and how I could have done better, but also what it's like when we get feedback. I think this is an important part of the conversation. And for sure, 100%, I cringed a little bit to think, oh my gosh, a podcast I created is now out there. Lots of people have listened to it. Lots of people will continue to listen to it. It's very hard to kind of pull something like that and edit it. And I cringe to think like there was language that I said that isn't helpful or inclusive. And it's actually wrong. Like it's not just, oh, this is a language choice. We know now that science is very much blowing apart this whole idea that we are born as male or female and that's it. And I'm not the expert to talk on this. I'm still learning. We are doing podcast episodes on that. So I'll try and link to any podcasts that we have about gender affirming language. We're also doing this work inside of Pelvic Health Professionals because I did not realize how gendered and how much my cisgender life had impacted my language. And I let Erin know that I have been learning here on the podcast and I've been taking workshops and we have more gender inclusive educators inside of Pelvic Health Professionals answering our questions about this. And also everyone I've learned from tells me that they're still learning. They're still messing up, even the experts. And they also talk about the importance of listening to a variety of voices. So I think this is important. You know, when you get feedback, one person will tell you how it lands and how it feels. Just know that, there will be other people who have a similar experience, and then there will be completely other things that you might have missed. That's what I'm saying. It's sometimes really uncomfortable. The most important thing that I've learned over the years is that when someone offers us feedback like this and they spend the time to educate you, it is such a gift. So Erin wrote me back and shared another part after that, and I wanted to share it in here as well because I think we can all learn from it, again, about language. And I think it's really important to learn that when someone comes forward and says, this is how this has impacted me, and they are living that experience, that we really listen and sit with it and ask ourselves, how can I do better? So here's me thinking about that. Okay, so Erin goes on to say, they write, "Hi Shannon, thank you so much for the warmth and receptivity in which you have responded and for your clear values of accountability and continuous learning. It can feel scary to speak up sometimes, and I really appreciate the way that you are engaging in this conversation. I'm wondering if there is a way to also attach the feedback to the original episode 108 so that people who listen can likewise hear, view the updates." So Erin, I just want to give you an update on this. It's harder to pull the audio, but I'm going to ask our team what that would involve to see if we could stick some audio at the beginning or what it would be like to edit that. I don't know what it would do to our podcast feed. I don't know the answers to this, but I definitely know that after today's episode, we can link to this one in the show notes and tell people to go and have a listen to that and explain why in the show notes. And Erin goes on to say, I would actually like to offer one more piece of feedback. which I needed some time to process before arriving at a place of being able to articulate it. I felt that your repeated emphasis on how challenging it can be to change one's language/thinking around gender and pronouns overshadowed the challenge and trauma of being misgendered or being in spaces in which there's no room for one's experience. The latter of which is compounded by the fact that many gender non-conforming people experience it over and over again every day wherever they go. It was also clear that the episode was geared toward an imagined cisgender audience with no background in these topics. As a gender fluid and queer person and former educator who started to learn about this in depth 15 years ago and who is surrounded by trans and gender non-conforming partners, friends, family members, and community, many of whom also practice yoga and some of whom teach it, I felt alienated and that myself, my community, my life experience was not represented or was assumed not to be present. To be clear, I do think it is helpful to acknowledge that changing habits is challenging. It's the degree to which this is emphasized and the relative exclusion of other experiences that I find alienating and out of balance. Perhaps interviewing a person with lived experience, for example, a trans man or non-binary person interested in pre-postnatal yoga, would help listeners to better understand and empathize with some of what can come up. I hope that you're able to receive this additional feedback with an open mind and an open heart as you did my first message. Please let me know if you would like to discuss this further. I'm open to answering any clarifying questions you may have. Please also know that I'm offering this feedback with an open heart. I've been hesitant to share for a few reasons, one of them being that it is so clear to me that your heart is in the right place, your intentions are positive, and I'm so glad that you're having these conversations on your podcast and with me. I do think that most of what you shared in episode 108 is fabulous, informative, and spot on, and I learned some helpful tips and word alternatives myself. Oh my goodness, thank you again, Erin. I mean, my level of gratitude for the time that you took to send me this email and really take the time to educate me and explain to me how this felt and how this landed. It means so much. Like I can't even express all the gratitude that I feel. And I tried in my reply email, and I feel like I'm trying here again on the podcast. Connected yoga teachers who are listening, I also hope that you know that you can approach me with any feedback. I really do see it as a gift. I know what it's like to listen to a podcast or read an article or see something and feel like, that information isn't all right. Like I've learned and I know something and that just doesn't sit right. And it takes time and energy to reach out. And that's what Erin did. And I'm just so grateful that you did that, Erin, so that we can all learn. And Erin is 100% right. Like after talking with multiple people inside of Pelvic Health Professionals, more around gender affirming language, the more I would hear kind of the same message, but in a different way, or new things would pop up as well with our different guest experts. For example, we had Jacoby Ballard come in and talk to us about trans pregnancy. It's a whole other level of understanding. And what Erin is saying here is super important, that I will never, as a cis woman, I can never be at the place where I really understand, but I can hear this feedback and look at my words. And so I want to share that here's where I'm at right now with this email is oftentimes I want to come on the podcast and talk about something that I've really processed and I've learned about. And instead today, I really want to share being in this moment of thinking, okay, how did I do this? What were my words? And I feel like on some level I can understand this right now. I was saying, oh gosh, it's so hard for me as a cis person who's grown up with the language I grew up with. And I'm exaggerating how I would say this because it's like so self-centered. It's very hard for me to change my language. And Erin is bringing it to my attention, and I'm so grateful for this. Like, okay, well, how do you think it feels as a non-binary or trans person who has to deal with this every single day? When I got this feedback, I felt like I could really hear it because I've been doing lots of learning in this. But there are times in my life where I cannot hear feedback right away. I don't have the capacity yet. I don't have the knowledge yet. And I would just say in that moment, what I've learned is when you do learn, reach out to that person who gave you that feedback. Even if time has passed, even if quite a bit of time has passed, I've done that, and let them know, oh my goodness, I really messed up here. I've learned more, and thank you for your feedback. As much as possible, if you can reply, even if the feedback doesn't feel, now I'm hesitating here because there is something like, if somebody just writes you and tells you all of the horrible things that they can think of, I feel like that's different. But sit with the feedback. I think when you sit with it for a moment, you'll see what's the intention of this person. Erin's intention is very clear. Erin took the time to really sit down and say, here's what didn't feel helpful. Like, Erin gave me a tremendous gift in this feedback. It was very kind. Erin could have just said, look, you did this inclusive episode and it was crap and you need to do better, Shannon, and just left it at that or said nothing at all. So I believe that we are all wrong. This continues throughout our life as yoga teachers, as parents, as coworkers, friends, colleagues, family members, partners. As soon as we're in relationship with others, we really it comes right into our faces on how we're making mistakes, we're doing or we're saying the wrong thing. And I want you to know you're not alone in this. There are not people walking around who are right all the time. If you think that they are, they're not. If they're letting on to you that they're right all the time, I think that's problematic. And when someone gifts you feedback, especially when you do not have that lived experience, like that's the second email Erin is saying, okay, Shannon, you do not have this lived experience. It's really time to sit and listen and sit with it, not just for one moment, but to learn to the point where you can, obviously you can't have that lived experience, but you can look at your words and think, okay, I need to learn more. And you might want to defend yourself. I felt this right away. I told Erin in my email, and I've even said it here in this podcast, that I am learning more, that we did have someone on the podcast talking more about gender inclusivity, and that we had people inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. That part of me that's rising up right there, that is me feeling defensive. And so the last piece that I'd really love to leave you with about this is, how can we turn to the teachings of yoga in this moment when we get this feedback, or when we realize, oh my gosh, I said the wrong thing, I did the wrong thing. For me, what comes to mind first is that svadhyaya, the self-study. So me noticing, okay, I want to prove to Erin or kind of defend myself and say, I'm taking more training. So ask yourself, can I look at how am I reacting and feeling right now? And then also ahimsa, how can we do the least harm possible going forward? Satya, how can I be truthful about this? How can I share with people as I learn? And getting curious and asking more questions and being wrong. This is all part of learning. And every yoga teacher I've ever talked to tells me that they love learning. So if you love learning, we're all in this together. We're all here for being wrong and having more questions than answers a lot of the time. I would love to hear from you on this. What would you add to this? What have I missed? What have I forgotten? How have I messed up in today's episode? Is there something I got wrong? Send us an email or leave a voicemail anytime whenever you're feeling like that. Thank you if you do take the time to do that. Also, if you want us to share it on the podcast, let us know, or let us know if you're like, please do not share this on the podcast. All of the links for today's episode are over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/247. And if you're wanting to reach out to us, make sure you go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and you can either leave us a voicemail, that's the button on the right-hand side, or there's also a contact page there. I want to say a huge thank you to our entire team, Suzanne, our audio engineer, Crunch, our resident writer, Sinead, our community support manager, and Erica, our virtual assistant. Also, huge thank you to you for being here, for hanging out all this time, taking the time to listen to me share about my mistakes today. I really hope it was helpful. I also want to give a shout out of thank you to everyone who has been joining me this month as I have my Get Outside Daily challenge that I give myself every time we move into colder weather. I've been sharing my updates and my struggles with cold winter weather and how walking outside daily, no matter what the weather is like, how that really supports and helps me. I've been sharing about that over on Instagram. If we're not already connected on Instagram, come and find me at The Connected Yoga Teacher. A shout out of thanks to Jacoby Ballard, who was our guest last week on the podcast. Jacoby has joined all of us as we walk outside, and I'm so grateful for that. And if you haven't listened to last week's episode, go and do that and follow and learn from Jacoby. Go buy their book, use the coupon code that we share in the show notes. You'll get 30% off, and there's also free shipping in the US, and I'll make sure I put the links in the show notes. And if you are listening in real time, the book, Jacoby's book, releases tomorrow, November 23rd, 2021. And I cannot wait to hold a physical copy of this book. I've already read an advance copy, part of it, and I also plan to download the audio version. So no pressure, Jacoby. Get on that, please. I can't wait to hear it. Okay, Connected Yoga Teachers, it is time for me to sign off. So I want to know from you, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?